Okay, so yeah, I'm going to be summarizing the Descendants trilogy and talking about some of the funnier elements that are kind of weird about this trilogy. Like, for example, the fact that the second and third movies just like vehemently disagree with each other in terms of moral and message, which is just hilarious. But I'm gonna start by just summarizing the first one, and the first one's honestly not that interesting. It's just a pretty generic Disney Channel movie because they're Disney Channel shows. They're not actually Disney, but yeah, you gotta understand the first one to get the general idea of the world we're working with, because they take the world in a lot of directions that make you kind of like realize that it was completely messed up the way they built it. But like the first movie is just brief and not really that thoughtful, so you don't really care that it doesn't make sense or even notice usually, unless you're like deliberately trying to find everything that doesn't make sense with the movie. But once you get to the later movies, you're like, you've asked me to think too long about this world, and like now all of these problems that were never addressed when it was created are coming up. So we're gonna have to go through the first movie to begin. And honestly, the first movie's biggest sin is just that it's not really that interesting, especially the characters. So the movie starts with, well, we get like a little narration that tells us Beauty and the Beast made a kingdom called Oradon, and they invited all the Disney characters to come live there. And there's a school for all their children, their descendants. And now Beauty and the Beast's son Ben's like 16th birthday or something. And that means he's gonna become king. Which, like, it's the first scene, and already immediately you're like, what? Like, he's 16. Shouldn't he be becoming, like, officially prince? Or, like, officially deemed heir to the throne? Like, the Beast is, like, early 40s, maybe. Why is he giving up the throne to, like, a 15, 16-year-old boy? Just doesn't make sense. So Ben is, like, my first act as king since when we created this kingdom and invited all the Disney characters here. We took all the Disney villains, and because they were all evil and dangerous, locked them up on a magic island and used the fairy godmother's magic wand to put a magic spell on the island, so you can't get off and you can't use magic there. But since it's been some time and now there's all these descendants, I want to bring some of the villain descendants over to Oradon and to the schools to give them a real chance at being heroes. And of course, his parents are like, oh my goodness, that's such a risky idea. I don't know about that. You're gonna have to prove yourself in this movie. And then they're like, who would you bring over? He's like, well, first I'm gonna bring Jafar's son, Cruella de Vil's son, the evil queen's daughter, and the daughter of Maleficent. And they're like, Maleficent? She's like the most evil one. Her daughter's gonna be so evil. That's crazy. None of those characters are interesting. Obviously, the moral is gonna be like, oh, just because they had bad parents, doesn't mean they're evil people. Which is a fine enough moral for one Disney Channel show, but it's not. There's not a lot of weird shit when you really dive into what the stories are telling you. Which in the second and third one, it definitely gets really weird. With them, like, it's honestly hard to tell what their messaging is trying to be. Even you have to do like some deep analysis to be like, are we supposed to agree with this character at this point? Because the second and third shows don't agree with each other, so you're like, are we still going off the logic of the second movie or the third? But in the first movie, it's just very straightforward what they're trying to say, which is that, like, the sins of the parents shouldn't fall on the children. But the thing is, these characters are straight up evil, and it's never made, like, questionable of whether or not they're really good people or really bad people. Like, they're very clearly bad people, and Maleficent tells her daughter, like, get the fairy wand so we can open up the prison and I can escape and take over the kingdom. And so she's trying to do that throughout the movie, so you're not, like, questioning whether or not she's good. And the point of it is not to question whether or not they're evil, but whether or not they can change and become good people. And obviously they can, because it's a Disney Channel movie. And Ben, throughout the movie, is very much in favor of them becoming good people, because that's his whole plan. And, like, so some of the other kids are kind of mean to them, like, ooh, there's our villains, we're heroes. But he's like, give them a chance, guys. The real problem is that I don't like any of these characters, and mostly because their stories are really uninteresting. First, we have Jafar's son. He plays tourney, which is like their sport, and then he learns that he likes tourney. That's his entire character arc. Boring. Cruella de Vil's son Cruella de Vil teaches him that dogs are like evil and scary, and then he meets a dog and he likes the dog because it's a cute dog, and that's his entire character arc. And you're like, okay, that's fine. I don't care. The Evil Queen's daughter is by far the best character throughout this series, just because she has like some amount of character, and her actress is like kind of charming, and Mel is, we'll get to, deeply unlikable. So she's by far just the best character, and that's a pretty low bar for her. Her only real motivation is that she wants to marry a beautiful prince, but then she meets the descendant of one of the seven dwarves. I think it was like Dopey, and he's like a big nerd, but she falls in love with him instead, and she's like, oh, guess I was wrong, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cute. She's fine, and then Mel's things that she wants to do what her mom told her to do and get the wand and free the people, and then she's like, I gotta go to the king's Ben's christening as king because the fairy wand will be there, and I gotta be right up in the front, and the only people up in front are his friends and family and his girlfriend. So I'm gonna get him to break up with his girlfriend and fall in love with me with my love spell that I cast from Maleficent's spellbook that she gave me. So he falls in love with her, and then like he's usually in a movie where a love spell is cast, especially when it's a villainous love spell. That person becomes like really, really obsessively in love, or like the love feels awkward or unreal. But he just seems like he's genuinely nice and like wants to get to know her and stuff. So you're like, that seems like the moral's not going to be that they aren't going to get together because of a love spell. It's like that this is the beginning of their actual real relationship, which is bizarre because it's also a manipulation to be his girlfriend to steal a fairy wand. Weird setup, and these characters just don't really have any chemistry, and I don't really like Ben as a character at all. Mel, Maleficent's daughter, is like kind of a bad girl, and the Ben is he's just a nice guy. So you're like, what does he like about her? Literally nothing. Anyways, towards the end of the movie, she tries to unlove potion him. She's like, do you really love me? And he's like, I don't know. Guess we'll have to wait for the love potion to wear off. And she's like, oh, you knew? And he's like, yeah, I figured it out, but I was fine with it because I actually liked you too. And you're like, this is bizarre, but whatever. It serves the story. Anyways, the christening happens, and Maleficent's daughter, is emotionally manipulated the fairy godmother's daughter a little bit in this movie so she steals the fairy wand to try and make herself prettier because she made her feel bad about her appearance. And she accidentally opens up the barrier and lets Maleficent out, and then Maleficent attacks, and Mel's like, I was only being evil because it was what you made me feel like I had to do, but now that I've been on the good people's side, I realize I actually like being good. And then they fight, and Maleficent turns into a big dragon, and they beat her, and she gets transformed into like a little baby lizard. And that's the end of that story. And so the conclusion is pretty obvious what the moral is. At least I, as a normal person, concluded that the moral of that story was that the villains should be sent to Oradon and rehabilitated and get a chance to be good people. But apparently, whoever wrote the next movie did not get that moral. Or at least felt that the characters in this story did not learn that moral, which I don't know how they couldn't have, because it's a pretty straightforward moral. But that's just the beauty of Descendants 2. And Descendants 2 is like way better than the first one. Really, the first one is just kind of simple fun. You got a lot of iconic Disney characters, which kind of sucks because like these characters are so iconic, and mostly iconic because of the actors who play them, that when you just have random Disney Channel actors playing them, you're like, this just sucks. Like, Jafar is just some random dude. Like, that doesn't work. Like, he needs to be his, like, sassy self. Like, Jafar is, like, delighted in his evil, and he has fun with it, where this is just, like, a mean guy, and you're like, this is not... You can't compare to these incredibly well-crafted characters that are from the Disney classics. So you just, like, are like, let's just move on from these characters as quickly as possible, please. And this movie's a musical, too, and none of the songs are really all that great. They're pretty generic, they just serve their purpose, and you're just kind of like, okay, that's over. So the first movie gets like a pretty solid mid from me. There's not a lot of interesting things happening. It serves its purpose fine. Most of it's okay. There is a great scene, though, where, well, the first time Maleficent meets Ben's girlfriend, who is the daughter of Aurora. She's like, don't worry, I don't blame you, even though your mom cursed my mom. And then she's like, well, I don't blame you, even though your grandparents didn't invite my mom to your mom's christening, and that's why she cursed her in the first place. And it's like supposed to be kind of sassy, and like she's like kind of justifying her mom's being evil because it's the very beginning of the movie. But much later in the movie, once she's dating Ben and she's like interacting more with the heroes, they're like, we don't know about these villains being around all these heroes. Like, seems like it could be problematic. And she meets Sleeping Beauty's mom, which is, I guess, Ben's girlfriend's grandma. And she's like, this is Maleficent's daughter? Oh my goodness! This appalls me. And she's like in great distress. And she's like, she was the reason why I never saw my daughter growing up. And you're just kind of like, this 16-year-old girl has nothing to do with why you didn't see your daughter growing up. Like, calm the fuck down. Like, you just honestly feel bad for Mel in this scene. And you think she's like supposed to be learning a lesson about how her mom's not really as cool as she thought she was, and like maybe she shouldn't be justifying the stuff she did, but like she wasn't justifying any of the stuff she did in this scene. So it just feels like you're like, Sleeping Beauty's mom is just like kind of a bitch to be around. uh, Weird scene. I should move on to the second movie. So this movie starts out with Mel being a princess now because she's dating Ben and he's the king, so she's becoming a princess. And she's like overwhelmed by all the work it takes to be a princess, and she can't live up to all these standards. And so she uses some magic from her spell book to like kind of keep up with all the stuff she has to do because she's overworked by being a princess. And for some fucking reason, all of the characters in this movie have some weird moral grandstanding to do about how she's using magic to solve her problems. And you're like, I don't understand. Like the first movie, they were kind of like, yeah, we have that magic fairy wand, but we don't really use it anymore because we like to learn how to solve our problems without magic. And that's like a fine enough moral, I guess, but there was never really any good reason why magic shouldn't be used. And throughout both movies, Millicent uses her magic to like help her friends, and sometimes it causes shenanigans, but sometimes it solves them, so you're kind of like, it's fine that she's using magic. And kind of the nice thing about bringing these villain kids over to Orndale is that like whenever you bring people from different worlds together, they bring new perspectives, and like having a magic girls with Maleficent's spellbook but a good character is kind of a cool thing. But for some reason every character is like, you still have that spellbook? You should really get rid of that. And you're like, why though? So there's this scene where she's with Ben and she's prepared him this big meal, and she's like, I almost forgot, but I did it in time. And he's like, this is great. And then he realizes that she used magic to make it. And he's like, why did you have to use magic? And then she reveals what this meal actually was before she used magic. And it's like one sandwich. And she's like, I just didn't have enough time with all the other stuff that's going on. And he's like, this is inauthentic and you lied to me. And like, I didn't need this whole meal. I would have understood. And then she runs off sad. He's like, I really like sandwiches. It would have been fine with just a sandwich. And you're like, okay, but like she used magic to make it better than just a sandwich. Like, what's the problem? Why you like what? Why does this have to be a thing where it's like it would have been fine if it was a sandwich? Like, sure, maybe. Why can't she use magic to make it better though? There's no reason. And I think they think that it's like inauthentic to use magic to achieve your goals, but you're just like, huh? Anyways, she decides that she can't be a princess and that she was never meant for Arendelle. So she has to go back to the island where she truly belonged. Also, she has a terrible, terrible look when she's in her princess mode, but the movie acknowledges that it looks terrible.
You can't see where your face ends and your hair begins.
So I'm going to let it slide because it seems intentional. But it is just a pain to watch because you're like, she looks so awful. When she gets to the villain place, the evil stepmother's stepdaughter, so the daughter of one of the evil stepsisters, that she's like a nice girl, and she gives her a makeover, and then she looks decent, and you're like, okay, thank God. I don't know why that was a thing. But all of this, everything I've said so far about the second one, is literally just a plot device so that Ben can go onto the island. The second movie introduced the amazing character of Uma, who is the daughter of Ursula. And you can tell she's like a fan favorite character because like she's on like all the covers of all the movies going forward. And like as the movies go on, they're like more and more Uma focused and less focused about the actual original team because like nobody gives a shit about them anymore once Uma's been introduced. Very funny. So when she first starts out as a character, I honestly didn't think she was really all that cool because her main motivation was just that like, Mel was kind of mean to her growing up. And you're like, I don't really care. But as they develop her character, you're like, wait, she's actually right about like a ton of shit. So at this point, you're kind of realizing that like this idea from the first movie that's like, are the people from the island evil or not, is not really a thing they're concerned with anymore in these movies. Like they've already proved the fact that they can be rehabilitated. So the idea that they were ever evil to begin with doesn't really matter. So like for example, the evil stepmother's granddaughter is just like so unambiguously good, which raises the question of like, because she's being raised by the evil stepmother as her step grandmother, and you're like, you know who else was raised by the evil stepmother? Fucking Cinderella.
Lots and lots of sweeping.
Sounds like the old Cinderella treatment, hey?
Obviously, her descendants aren't evil if Cinderella is her descendant also. So, like, how did they not already realize this concept that villainous people will not have villainous kids? Have none of you met Cinderella? Like, she probably is a character in this universe. Very funny to think about, but they honestly just don't care anymore about whether or not people on the island are evil, which is fine. We've seen the first movie, but it makes it weird that they haven't let more kids off the island at this point. But you just kind of assumed that like there's a schedule for doing that, and like they've been doing it or they're gonna be doing it. But this movie makes you question that because also on top of that, this area, like people want to get off the island because it's like a quote unquote prison, but it's not a prison in the sense that like there isn't cells that they're in and there isn't like guards that are letting them out of their cells to go to the courtyard or anything like that. It's literally just like an area with like shops and businesses and people going to work who just are all villains. And in the first and the second movie, you're kind of like, the place sucks to live in, but it's because it's full of criminals and like there's a lot of criminal activity happening. And you're kind of like, well, these characters were criminals, so like serves them right that they have to live with the consequences of being criminals and being around criminals. Like, I'm not going to feel too bad for them. But as the trilogy goes on, they make this place seem like more and more clearly like very impoverished, and you're like, okay, this seems a bit more like malicious on the kingdom's part to just allow this island to exist in this fashion. Which is why Uma's motivation, like, you're like, hold on, I think she might actually be right though, because at first she's mad that Mel was mean to her and that Mel got picked to get taken off the island and not her, and you're kind of like, I don't care. Like, obviously somebody had to get picked to be taken off the island first, so like it's a bummer it wasn't you, but like it had to be somebody, so it'll happen to you a bit later. Like, get over it. But apparently that's an incorrect assumption to make, because apparently they're not going to take anyone else off the island. At least they kind of forgot to do that, because after Uma kidnaps Ben, she's like, I'm ransoming you in exchange for the fairy wand. Your friends better bring it here, and I'm going to use it to break out of this place and take all my pirates with me, and we're going to Arendelle. And he's like, no, you don't have to be evil. You don't have to do it like this. And then she's like, you left us here in this prison, and you took that one girl, but not the rest of us. And he's like,
the plan was to start with 4 kids and bring more people over. I guess I was busy being king. That sounds lame.
I got so busy with all my kingly duties, I forgot about the people on the island. And you're like, excuse me, what the fuck? That's your excuse? It's not that you were gonna take them out and it just hasn't happened yet. It's that you literally fucking forgot about all of these, at least hundreds of people in prison who are just children. Like, excuse me? Such a weird argument. Not even an argument, just a weird thing for his character to do. And then he's like, look,
come to Oridon and be part of the solution.
If you let me go, I'll bring you over to the island like I did with Mel, and I'll continue to bring people over like I said I was going to. And she's like, I don't need you. And you're kind of like, okay, but she's right though, because like, you were already promising to do that and you just never fucking followed through with it for no reason other than I forgot. And on top of that, in the next movie, they also promise Uma that they'll let all the people out of the island if she helps them. And then they fucking stab her in the back.
I lied to you.
Hold up.
So you're like, she was right not to trust him. Like, that was never going to get the people off the island. She absolutely should be ransoming his ass for the wand to get all these people off the island. Because, like, these are actual innocent children who aren't even evil anymore. They're well established to just be, like, normal kids. And this fucking king who threw them in there and is responsible for getting them out literally admits he fucking forgot about them. So you're like, yes, Uma, you're correct. King Ben's offer to Uma is like to be part of the solution, which is come over to the island and be part of his rehabilitation little team. And it's like she fucking hates the island because the island locked her up and then forgot about her. So obviously she's not going to be good towards the island. She's going to be like defiant. So you're like, of course she's not going to go for that. She's completely reasonable not to want to go for that. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And she has this great line where...
Set me free, and we'll go back together.
Oh, so now I get an invite.
And you're like, yeah, that's true, though. Very weird. And, like, you're like, maybe him forgetting about his entire thing about letting all these people off the island is why you shouldn't make a fucking 16-year-old king to begin with. And, like, throughout this movie, you're like, okay, Ordon has, like, serious problems. Like, this weird, it's basically a ghetto. It's not a prison. It's just a place where they've ushered a bunch of people into, most of whom are innocent, and forced them to live in poverty. But the movie refuses to allow you to think critically or negatively about Ordon at all. And there's this side plot where, because the only thing Jafar's son's character is about is playing tourney, is that Mulan's daughter wants to play tourney. But the rule book says tourney team can only be a captain and his men, and she's not a man, so look at that. It's like Mulan, where she has to prove she can do it as a woman. And you think it's gonna end with them being like, these rules are wrong, women can do it too. But no, it doesn't end like that. Instead, they're like, we found a workaround. This says the team has to be a captain and their men, so you can be the captain, actually. And you're like, that's a fun enough workaround, but why is the idea that Ordon's rules can ever be questioned or changed, like, have to be deliberately worked around? Like, it's okay to be like, actually, this country is wrong sometimes. But no. Even in this little side plot, all of the rules of the country have to never be questioned. And you're like, at this point, I'm just kind of hating Beauty and the Beast. Like, this trilogy made me hate Beauty and the Beast, because, like, they're straight up evil. In the first movie, they're like, what do you think villains teach their children growing up? How to be good? No. And you're like, okay, like, I could understand why someone would have that argument. Like, it does make sense that villainous parents would have villainous kids, which is why the first movie isn't about whether or not they're villains, but whether or not they can become good people when removed from the influence. But by, like, the second and third movie, you're like, what argument is left? Like, why do you have a ghetto still? Very strange. This movie ends with them escaping with Ben. They go back to the island, but apparently when they opened the border a little bit to leave, Uma just jumped through and she escaped. And then there's a big fight at the end where she turns into a big tentacle monster like Ursula, and Mel turns into a big dragon like Maleficent, and they fight, and Uma swims away. There's a nice little dance, and the evil queen's daughter, I can't be fucked to remember these characters' names, she's been on the island for a little bit, and she was talking to the daughter of the evil stepmother, the granddaughter of the evil stepmother. So she's like, there's a very sweet young girl in the island that I think that we should think about releasing next. In fact, maybe we should make a list of people. And he's like, you know what? I think that's a good idea. And that's supposed to be like the lesson he learned throughout this movie. And you're like, what? Like, that... The first movie began with him being like, Mom, Dad, I want to start releasing children from the island. And we're going to start with these 4 people as like a proof of concept to prove that the villains can become good people. So I kind of assumed that before even the beginning of the first movie, he already had a list of other people he wanted to remove from the island. And if that list didn't exist before the beginning of the first movie, at least the end of the first movie or the beginning of the second movie, But apparently no, it's the moral of the movie that they actually should release people from the island. And you're like, thought that was the moral of the first movie, but apparently we need a second movie because King Ben literally fucking forgot. That's the only excuse he gives, is that he forgot that the first movie happened. Insane. Truly, truly awful. I think that's everything I have to say about the second movie. It's the best movie in the trilogy because you can just watch it backwards and root for Uma the entire time, and by the third movie you will be vindicated because, like I said, the second and third movie do not agree with each other. So the third movie begins, and they're finally taking 4 children off the island, and you're like, Jesus Christ, it's the beginning of the third movie, and they finally moved kids off this island again. Like, what a slog to get here, but at least it's finally happening again. And the 4 people they pick are like the 4 most good children there could possibly be. Like, immediately seeing them, you're like, oh, the fucking henchmen of Hook, that kind of dopey looking, silly pirate, who's probably not even that evil, has like 2 adorable 6-year-old shy little boys. Like, pretty sure they're not fucking evil. Like, we've moved past the point of whether or not these characters are evil, and it's moved to the point where, like, we know they're just good, fine people, and they should be moved off the island. But for some reason, they only take 4 people again. And you're like, you already wasted an entire movie's time forgetting and then re-remembering that you're supposed to move people off this island. And now that we finally got to the part where we're moving people off the island again, we're still stuck to 4. Like, it made sense when it was to only have 4 people, when it was still, like, a proof of concept that you were trying to prove that this idea could work. And on top of that, the 4 people you were taking were, like, Maleficent's daughter, like, one of the most evil characters in any Disney movie. But, like, now that you're moving off, like, the henchmen of Hook's adorable twins, like, I think you can take out, like, 20 or 30 kids at a time. Like, maybe stick to 4 problematic children who need extra help to learn how to be good, and then 10 or 20 regular children. But no, they're still only doing it 4 at a time. So I'm already annoyed by that. Then they close the border a little bit so their little taxi can get out. And when it's closing behind them, Hades sticks his head out and he starts attacking, and they have to fight him off. And he's like, I am a god! I don't belong here! And you're like, wait a second. Hold up. True. Let's think about Hades for a second. Even in the Hercules movie, I'm basically rooting for Hades. Because what is his motivation? He thinks his job working in hell, or the afterlife, sucks, and he's annoyed that he got stuck with it. And he thinks the jobs in Olympus, being cool gods, are much better, and he wants those jobs. You're kind of like, there's no reason why he shouldn't have those jobs, so I think he should follow his passion and become a god at Olympus. I'm sure he's kind of evil about how he goes about doing it, but he's a fun villain. By the end, he gets punched in the face by Hercules, and he's left in Hades to, like, go back to his job in Hades that he hates. And you're kind of like, that's a fair punishment. Like, he has to do the job he hates. He tried to get out of doing it by being evil. He got beaten, now he's stuck doing his job. But then he gets sent to magical prison? Like, that doesn't track. Like, who's in charge of Hades then? That's his job. The whole point was that he wanted to get out of that job. And now you're telling me he did get out of that job and put in prison? That makes no sense for his character. Like, he is a god. He's right. He shouldn't be here. And, like, when you're just watching the first movie, it's just a Disney Channel movie, and it's fairly brief. So if you're not some internet asshole who's overanalyzing these movies on purpose, you're not really thinking about it. But by the time you've gotten to the third movie, and there's literally characters like, why am I here? You start to ask yourself, why are any of these characters here? Like, I think Cruella de Vil, her story takes place in, like, the early 20th century. Peter Pan takes Wendy from the early 20th century, so Hook is from the early 20th century. But then, like, Maleficent and the Evil Queen are from, like, the medieval times, and they have a magical world. So you're like, these stories not only didn't take place in the same times and completely different worlds. Like, it makes no sense that they're here. And on top of that, Mulan's daughter is here? Like, Mulan is from Imperial China. Why did she send her daughter to a castle school led by a French king? Like, did she defect from China? It's very confusing. None of these characters make any sense in the same world together. And, like, they only show characters that can be played by human actors because it's a Disney Channel show. Which, when it's just one movie, it's fine. But by the third movie, when you're interacting with people like Hades, you're like, where's Pain and Panic? Like, obviously I know where they are. they didn't want to CGI them in or do a big practical effect for them, so they just can't have them. But within the universe, it doesn't feel like they ever spent any time thinking about why they wouldn't be here. And so you're just left being like, they're not here because of the limitations of a movie. And that just feels wrong. And you're like, maybe they're in Hades, they're in hell, manning hell, but like, they're equally as evil as Hook's henchmen. Where are they? Why is Pain and Panic not here? None of this movie's universe across this trilogy makes any goddamn sense. Not to mention the kids have fucking cell phones. So you're like, this is medieval times, I think, but also it's the early 20th century, but also they have cell phones. Are these characters immortal? And like, they don't even, like, are they from the movies I've seen? Because in the movie I saw, Ursula got stabbed through the fucking heart with a boat, and now her daughter is like talking back to her at the little shop they own, so she's still alive. And Gaston's son is like,
Tell your mama Gaston says hi, and also tell your dad that my dad wishes he finished off your dad when he had the chance.
and it's like, no, I think your dad fucking fell off the top of a giant ass castle and died. What? Not like, so many of these characters shouldn't be alive. So you're like, did the events of these movies even happen? And if not, how are these even the characters from those movies? It doesn't make any sense. This universe sucks. It's not at all thought through, which is fine for one movie, but once you've gotten this far into the universe, you're just like, this fucking doesn't make goddamn sense. And these movies don't even try to make sense. I'll get into it a bit later, but they're not even consistent within the universe. So you're like, nobody fucking tried. Anywho, they fight off Hades, and they get back to Auradon, and they're like, we let out 4 more kids, but when we did, Hades almost got loose, and he was attacking us. So that poses a pretty big threat to the people of Auradon. So what are we gonna do? And Mel's like,
and I think that there can't be any more going in and out.
and you're like, wow, that's fucking easy for you to say, someone who's no longer on the island. Like, what? And not to mention the children in this movie, like I said, are no longer evil children who have to learn how to be good. They're literally nice people who, upon eating a cake, say,
I especially love the lack of turds. And the lack of flies.
and you're like, holy fucking shit, this place is not bad because it's full of criminals. It's bad because it's deeply, deeply, horrifically impoverished. And the people of this kingdom are just okay with these actual innocent children living in what is actually unlivable conditions. This is unhumane, and it's been going on for 3 movies, and now we're talking about never, ever opening the island and again, because doing so poses a very small but completely manageable threat to the most privileged people in this country.
I just think that we have no other choice.
And you're like, what do you mean there's just no safe way to open this gate and let the children out? Every single security system, prison, or containment system in the entire fucking world has a double lock system. If you can use the magic wand to create a bubble of anti-magic that keeps villains in, then just create a second smaller bubble right around the entry, and then open the smaller bubble to go in, close the smaller bubble, open the entrance to the big bubble, and walk in. So there was a double airlock, like how every security system has. It's so easy to come up with a solution. Or if for some reason we're anti-magic in this movie, and we can't just remake the prison, then just get fucking Hercules to go with you, and when Hades sticks his head out through the exit way that you left through for 30 seconds, ask Hercules to just stand there and punch anybody who tries to come through. Like, what? It's so easy to just fix this problem. And you're like, it spent us 3 fucking movies to finally get this country to agree to end what is just a ghetto. It's just a ghetto. It's deeply impoverished. The people there are mostly innocent. It's really not about the villains, because we rarely see villains. It's mostly about the Descendants, and there's hundreds more Descendants than there are villains. So you're like, it's mostly completely innocent people living in completely inhumane conditions, even for a prison. And we're never gonna open it again because Hades might stick his fucking head through and shoot some fireballs. And you're like, it's like the quote where it's like, the true measure of a country is how it treats its least privileged, right? And they even say this to her, where they're like,
I mean, the four of us are living the dream here, and we finally get to share that. I mean, what could be more important than that?
Yeah. I know. I mean, maybe security, or maybe peace of mind for everyone in Oradon.
and you're like, what is this fucking conservative-ass logic? Like, there's no other word for it. And obviously she's wrong. Like, the moral of the story is not that she was right for doing that. But it's at least supposed to be like a understandable character flaw that she learns throughout this movie to be wrong about. And you're like, no, it's an abhorrent decision. It makes her a horrible person. And the fact that they finally revealed that people have been eating around dirt and flies makes you realize that, like, the Beauty and the Beast were awful people throughout the first two movies. Like, truly awful people. Which is an insane thing to do to Beauty and the Beast characters that are, like, Disney wants us to like. Anyways, the problem with this movie is also that the villain is just deeply uninteresting. So it's Ben's ex-girlfriend, because Ben's with Mel now, and she's upset that she got picked over her, and so she wants revenge, and you're like, I don't give a fucking shit. Like, the first two movies, all of the villains were about the dynamic between the kingdom and the islanders, but this one's just about, like, a girl who didn't get chosen, so you're like, who cares? Which, to be fair to her, if my boyfriend, who was very publicly in a relationship with me, won a tourney match, grabbed a microphone, and then proceeded to do an entire song and dance number about how much he's in love with Mel, yeah, I'd probably want to fucking kill him too. Which, his excuse is that he had the love spell placed on him during that scene in the first movie, but, like, he never apologized to her. And he was literally like, it's okay that you put a love spell on me, because I kind of liked you too. So you're like, so are you justifying the fact that you fucking did that to her? Like, that's an awful thing to do. Anyways, the moral is supposed to be that, like, even people from the good world can be the villain, and the villains can become heroes, because they team up with Uma in this movie, and she becomes a hero. And you're kind of like, I saw the first movie where the villain became good people, and the person who closed the barrier and let Listen out was the good girl and not a villain. Like, any possible lesson we could learn from this story, we should have already learned from the first one. But the difference is that in this movie, we have Uma, who's there to constantly remind us that people should be let out of the island. So these fucking idiotic characters can't forget that. And you're like, thank you, Uma, for being here to beat these characters over the head with it, what they should be obviously learning. Anyways, they're like, oh no, Ben's girlfriend, who's Sleeping Beauty's daughter, is all evil now, and she has Maleficent's wand, and the only way to stop the magic and defeat someone who has Maleficent's wand is to get Hades' Ember, which is something we've never heard of before. It's not even in Hercules. So you're like, why did you make that up? Like, you have so many iconic movies to draw from. Why did you add a weird plot device that's not even a thing? But on top of that, the real problem is that it's completely inconsistent with the first movie. Didn't you watch the first movie? Guy who made this, Maleficent got let out from the island and had her scepter and fought against Mel. And Mel just beat her because, I don't fucking know, you can easily just rip this out of anybody's hand who has it. It's not impossible to stop someone just because they have a magic item. And on top of that, I saw Maleficent. These movies are not original characters. She turned into a big dragon, and that random prince guy immediately stabbed her in the stomach in the most anticlimactic scene, and she died like a bitch instantly.
Bam! Bitch went down.
Bitch went down! Like, also, like, Maleficent's not a threat. She died so quickly. And on top of that, Mel gets cursed to be like an evil lady. Old lady, like, look like the evil queen as an old lady, and she looks like that. It's a reference to that. She gets cursed by Maleficent's wand. But when they go to the island to try and get Hades' Ember, she reverts back. And they're like, well, of course you would, because the whole point of this island is that no magic works here.
Hey, I'm me again. Duh, evil magic doesn't work here. Kind of the point.
The whole point of the first movie was that we had to get the magic fairy's wand so we could let people out of here, because no magic works here.
Kind of the point.
And you're like, so if no magic works here, then Maleficent's wand doesn't work here. Obviously it doesn't work here. We just watched it stop working here.
Duh.
So what the fuck is this thing about how we need Hades' Ember because it's the only thing that can stop Maleficent's wand? Like, it's not only have I seen the first movie where that didn't happen, I've just watched it not happen now. So you have seen the first movie then, because you remembered that this wand can beat Maleficent when she has the scepter. So, like, what the fuck is this plot device? Very strange. They forgot their own movie, I guess. So she gets Hades' Ember, and it's revealed that Hades' her dad. Who gives a shit? Doesn't matter at all. Then they're like, we gotta team up with Uma. Uma's like, I want the people on this island to be freed, because that's obviously my character. And they're like, fine, we'll agree. But she actually isn't gonna do it, because she already agreed to never let anyone off this island ever. So yeah, she's just lying and gonna backstab Uma, which is what I was saying earlier when I was like, yeah, she shouldn't trust these people. They literally backstab her. Like when Ben was like, let me go and I'll let you off the island. Like, don't trust him. Literally, these characters will lie to you about letting people off the island to use you, Uma. These characters are evil. So Uma teams up with them to try and stop the girl with the scepter. And like I said, it's a repeat of the first one, where the villain character proves herself to be a hero. And the real villain was the hero. So if there's no difference between the heroes and the villains, then you shouldn't really have this island where you lock up villains, which apparently we didn't learn from the first movie. But the thing is, Uma is not a villain. And she has nothing to learn in this movie because she's already right. And so it's Mel who learns because she's the villain. So it's a complete repeat of the first movie where she learns that being evil is bad and she should be good. But instead of her being evil, it's her listening to her mom and attacking Ardon. It's her realizing she's an evil dictator now and stop doing that. And Uma's character arc is that she hates Mel, and throughout this movie she learns to like Mel, and she learns to like Ben, and she learns to forgive the kingdom. But it's like Mel apologized to her for being mean to her whole life, and she, at the end of this movie, frees the people on the island. So like, of course she forgives her. She didn't grow as a character. She wanted a thing, and then it happened, and then she was no longer mad at them because they made it happen. So this movie ends with them being like, well, if the villains can be good and good people can become villains, then we can't have this island anymore. We're gonna get rid of the barrier altogether. And throughout this entire series, I've been thinking like, let all the kids off the island, let all the kids off the island, let all the kids off the island. But apparently they're just letting fucking everybody off the island. So I'm like, okay, even I wasn't gonna go that far. But when you start thinking about it, you're like, I guess this means Maleficent's just off the island now. No, wait, we beat her in the first movie and she's a baby lizard now for some reason. But I guess that means Hades off the island, but Hades and Mel kind of make up in this movie, and he does a thing where he's like, if you can forgive Ben's ex-girlfriend, then you should give me a second chance too. So like, he's not a villain anymore, or at least he's going to Hades, like he's not a threat. So you're like, who else is there? Cruella de Vil? Maybe lock up your dogs, but like, she doesn't pose a threat to the Empire. The evil queen, what's she gonna do? Poison everybody in the Empire with an apple? I don't think so. Jafar, maybe, I guess? Mostly his power is just from being an influential advisor, which he no longer is, and having a genie, which he no longer does. So he's just kind of a guy now. The only character across Disney canon that ever threatened an entire empire is maybe Scar. And I don't think they have lines in this fucking trilogy. Like, Ursula, what did she do? She made a completely willing contract with the Little Mermaid, and then kind of cheated at the end to win. She's not a threat to anybody. Like, you're like, hold on. Not only was it completely wrong to have these kids on this island, literally no one needed to be on this island. Like, good point, person who made the third movie. Nobody needed to be on this island. This island never needed to exist. There was never any reason to have this. And the moral of the second movie, if there even fucking is a moral of that second movie, other than just continue doing what we set up in the first movie, is never question Oradon. Give up on your magic, Mel. Get rid of that spell book. I don't have to give you a reason why. Just do it, because Oradon says so. Doesn't matter if you hate Oradon for locking up in this island. Trust Oradon. They'll maybe let you out eventually. Assuming Hades doesn't throw a few fireballs, in which case we'll cancel the entire program. Sorry, Mulan's daughter. You don't get to... we don't get to change the rules to let you join. You have to find a workaround, because these rules ain't ever get changed. And then whoever wrote this movie was like, no, enough of this Oradon is always right movie. Let's make a Oradon is always wrong movie, where the thing we've been spending the last two movies trying to justify, this fucking ghetto, we just blow up entirely. And you're like, okay, so none of these characters were right. There was no reason for this fucking awful ghetto to exist. And now it's gone. Beautiful ending. Wonderful ending. I love that in the second movie, I was agreeing with the villain and thought it was so funny because I only liked the villain's mindset and not the hero's. Only for the creator of the third movie to be like, you are correct, sir. Here's why the villain is correct. And then make a movie where the villain gets what they want. And the lesson we learn from this trilogy is that you should disagree with the second movie of this trilogy. You should agree with the villain of the second movie of this trilogy. The plan of the villain of the second movie of this trilogy goes through. Did they think any of it when they were planning these movies? So funny. God. And the best part is there's a fourth one coming out. I think that's everything I possibly could say about this trilogy. Oh, I almost fucking forgot. Also, in the second movie, there's a scene where Mel makes this magic potion to help Cruella de Vil's son, and it's a truth-telling spell. And the dog that Cruella de Vil's son adopted eats it instead, and he starts talking. And there's just an annoying talking dog across the next two movies, and you're like, oh fucking god damn it. Why does there have to be an annoying dog?
Talk, dog.
Does this vest make me look fat?
Does anyone have some bacon? Cookies?
You scared me!
You can't swim?
No?
You live on an island.
Yeah, with a barrier around it, remember? Ugh.